It's been a busy time for UK trade deals. First, we had a deal announced with India, which was substantive, a long worked on deal. Then we had a somewhat more rapidly achieved deal announced with the United States. And as is typical with Trump deals, it was really more of a statement of intent than an actual fully worked out deal. But still, it mattered due to the statements that it made about the various tariffs affecting the UK. Well, today we had the third of these, a deal with our closest neighbour, the European Union. But this one, of course, could never be considered for its pros and cons like the others, because this one is one of those areas that has become a toxic point of division over the last decade for the UK. We'll come back to that because, yes, a lot of noise has accompanied this announcement. But first of all, let's just go through what has actually been agreed. This was the first review of the UK's relationship with the EU since the original Brexit deal that was signed as the UK left the EU. That original deal had been put together in a situation of significant antagonism between the two parties. Boris Johnson's somewhat shambolic government employed some of the most ideologically trenchant Brexiteers in their cause, people who took delight in being hostile to Europe on a point of principle and who didn't necessarily show a great deal of skill in actually handling the detail of negotiations. You might speculate maybe they were early students of that famous book, The Art of the Deal. Anyway, what was agreed, a big area of focus, was the Defence and Security Pact. If there is one thing that served to rehabilitate the idea of the United Kingdom in Europe, it has been its leading role in supporting Ukraine. And that has been enhanced since Trump arrived in the White House because of the active role that Keir Starmer took, alongside French President Macron, in being proactive in seeking to manage Trump's engagement with Ukraine, especially in the crisis period following the Oval Office meltdown. As Europe realised that it needed to up its investment in its own defence, and indeed to do so mostly using European defence companies, the argument for collaboration between the UK and the EU became overwhelming. The UK has one of the more mature defence industries in the world, with certain specialisms that are particularly valuable to Europe if it's turning away from American companies. Likewise, the UK benefits enormously from more closely integrated with the EU on defence planning and on training, so the agreement brings the UK into high-level meetings of the EU on foreign and security dialogues. It enables the UK to participate in crisis management exercises under the EU's Common Security and Defence Policy, and it can participate in a €150 billion Loans for Arms fund. Now, none of that is especially controversial, but you can't say that for the next area, which is to do with access to fisheries. Even though fishing contributes just 0.3% towards GDP, it remains a highly emotive and symbolic area. So the agreement extends the current status quo, which was due to expire next year, for a further 12 years. That status quo gives access for EU boats to fish in UK waters. There is a poison pill clause to try to prevent this agreement from simply being ripped up in the way that Trump-inspired politicians sometimes do, bearing in mind that Reform UK is currently leading the polls, which is that the EU can levy a tariff on British goods if access is cancelled before the end of a 12-year period. Now, on the flip side, veterinary agreements in the deal would make it a lot easier to export agri-foods to the EU, removing a lot of bureaucracy that had been so onerous it was practically impossible to export certain fresh foods into the EU. So fishermen lose out on sharing access to UK waters, but some of them will gain in ease of exporting their produce into a sizable market once caught. Whether that's compensation or not, very much depends on who you ask. There's also an agreement for youth and business mobility and support for touring artists. The EU and the UK agree to work towards a youth experience scheme for 18 to 30-year-olds to travel and work more easily in each other's countries. It would be time limited, it would have a cap on overall numbers of participants, agreeable to both sides. And British tourists may, in future, be able to use EU passport e-gates at airports rather than joining the long queues for everyone else. There's some commitment to cooperate on internal energy trading, which would exempt the UK from the EU's carbon border tax that comes into force next year. And there would be mutually beneficial information exchanges on terrorism and other serious crimes. More cooperation on how to manage returns of illegal migrants to third countries. So that's the basic outline of the deal. The government says it will make food cheaper in the UK and will add around £9 billion to the economy by 2040. Now, how solid a hope that is, you can speculate according to your taste. The deal is not a trivial one, but it's certainly not remotely close to rejoining the EU or the single market, as some people are suggesting. Any more than closing a deal with the United States is close to us becoming the 51st state of America. Not that that has made a lot of difference to the tone of the response. It was inevitable, seems to me anyway, that just about any deal with the European Union, however minor, was going to be met by cries of betrayal from the Brexit champions such as Nigel Farage, and that line would be taken up with enthusiasm by the UK tabloid press, as indeed it was. See here, the lead article from the Daily Mail, Keir's Brexit sellout, calling what's just been agreed as a Brexit surrender deal and saying that he had been done up like a kipper by the EU. Now, one can like or hate this recent deal. I don't have strong emotions about it, to be honest, as I tend not to on trade deals, but the degree of catastrophising and the uncompromising tone of the debate is, shall we say, dispiriting. The language of it, and particularly as it gets transformed even further in thousands of foaming-at-the-mouth tweets, is designed to polarise British society in the same way that the US has egregiously self-harmed its way into political dysfunctionality. You can sharply criticise a trade deal without using the language of alienation and treason and betrayal. Now that said, I remind myself that the British tabloid press have been like this for as long as I can remember. Throughout all of that time, elections still by and large went with whoever was within sight of the centre ground and generally competent. So while lots of people were running around shouting in all caps about how Keir Starmer had just handed the next general election to the radical Trumpist right party Reform UK, well, that almost certainly doesn't hinge on a few excitable headlines 4 years before the election even happens. Not least because since Brexit actually took place, a significant number of people who voted to leave the EU have come to change their mind as the consequences became visible. And in any case, since we have left, and tweaking the details of a relationship for a deal like this doesn't change that basic fact, not many people see it as a high priority issue for them. Even Mr. Brexit, Nigel Farage, has largely moved on to focusing on immigration specifically, and then other areas he thinks he can make popular, such as anti-net zero positions. Keir Starmer, of course, is hoping that he is decisively moving the debate on for the UK by drawing the poison from it. He has aimed to soften some of the economic costs of Brexit without creating new, ongoing complaints that will come to hang around the media landscape like a bad smell for the next decade. Because ultimately there's nothing much in this deal that should be creating negative headlines once the initial huffing and puffing has subsided. The issue where that could happen is immigration, which is not covered in this deal. And it's no coincidence, therefore, that Starmer has recently been outraging and dismaying those in his own party with the aggressive language of his policy pitch on control of immigration, indeed even provoking comparisons with historic Enoch Powell, who famously back in the 1970s provoked outrage with a speech predicting rivers of blood in the streets if immigration was not curtailed. Now, that was overblown, but there's no doubt that Starmer seemed to make what historically tends to stand as a mistake on this sort of approach, which is to take a positioning that doesn't have the feel of authenticity to who you are. Labour could easily have found a way to be tough on controlling immigration and not making illegal immigration easy without talking what many see the cold and cruel language of MAGA politics. If the numbers go down, then Labour-coded language for taking control of a situation would have worked just fine. But apparently, adopting the clothes of your opponents to the degree that it provokes the sense of betrayal and revulsion in your own community, that is often a recipe for failure. Because the danger is you fail to get the other side to vote for you, because they will always vote for the more authentic and extreme version of what they want, the original. But you will probably depress your own vote, as some of your supporters stay at home in disgust or vote for an adjacent third party. In this case, that would be the Liberal Democrats or the Greens. But again, the election is a long way away, so maybe it will work. I mean, it provoked enough controversy and pushback that maybe that is what makes it memorable, makes it stick in people's minds. We will find out in due course. In the meantime, we have had not even a minor earthquake and certainly no casualties. Whatever the tabloid headlines are trying to persuade you is the fact.